this talk into 3 weeks, 3 sessions, so that you can get out and go to lunch before the sun sets. The title, as Catherine told you, is There's Nothing New in New Thought. And I'm going to be touching on this stream of new thought as it has come down through different people. And I'm sure that, it's okay, I'm sure that when when I get started on this, you'll think of maybe a lot of other people through which this stream of new thought has come. But I have chosen different ones for specific purposes. In unity, our belief is called eclectic, which simply means that we take the best from everything. We take the best from all religions. We believe that there's good in all religions. But many modern contemporary New Thought ministers and teachers feel that the modern movement of New Thought began with that New England mesmerist by the name of Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. And we'll be talking about him in the 3rd session. I've always had a problem with this because it seems to me that the stream of New Thought began long before the appearance of Jesus and came through many, many dominant figures throughout history. It's very difficult to know just where to start with this stream of new thought, these new ideas, concepts, and beliefs. Perhaps we can best center our attention on the most logical place, the philosophy of ancient Greece. At its heart, in the early recorded Greek teachings, is the idea of oneness, which was expanded as monism in philosophy and pantheism in some of the later philosophic and religious concepts. Now, monism is simply one presence, one power, one God. And pantheism is God is the entire universe. For example, in 500 BC, Heraclitus held that the universal substance is an ethereal spiritual essence, and that instead of being, everything should be thought of as being in a state of becoming. He held that nothing is stable except instability, nothing is constant except change. This is fundamental in our truth concepts, and this was a very important part of the teaching of Heraclitus. This is 500 years before the birth of Christ. Everything begins to change the moment it is born or created. And this, in other words, what we're teaching today, there is a constant process of growth and change. Now, in Plato, and his time was 429 to 328 BC, he had the greatest influence on this unfolding stream of truth. His concepts are seldom looked upon in a spiritual vein, but nevertheless they are very professional, very profound. Much of his concepts, ideas, and ideals can be found in the writings and teachings of Emerson. If you were in church this morning, you know that Curtis is going to start a series on Emerson on Wednesday evenings. But Plato had 3 fundamental theories, and I'm oversimplifying it because I'm certainly not a student of Plato. But the 3 theories that he had was first the existence of ideas. In other words, he said the universe as a whole is the embodiment of mind. He said the real existence is in the idea, not the thing itself. The real existence is in the idea of it, and not in the actual form itself. The second theory was the doctrine of pre-existence and the immortality of the soul. Plato believed very strongly in reincarnation. Reincarnation is not accepted totally throughout unity and through other New Thought groups. And there are some, for example, I'm trying to think of his name, that started religious science. Ernest Holmes. He was one that did not accept the idea of reincarnation. Does Mary Baker Eddy. We're going to get to her at the 3rd lesson, and that's a most fantastic story. But anyway. And 3rd, the subjection of the popular divinities into one supreme being. See, in In Plato's time, there were many, many gods, you see, and Plato had the idea of bringing it down to one God, one presence, one power. Aristotle was the one that coined the word metaphysics. We think it's a modern word. It was Aristotle back in 500, 400 BC. The prevailing science of Aristotle's day was called physique, which was the study of natural processes. And Aristotle was picking up where physique was leaving off, and so he coined the word metaphysique, which simply means beyond the physical, beyond the science of nature, beyond the materiality of life. So really, the word metaphysics is not a new word at all. It's been around a long, long time. In 340 to 265 BC, we had this interesting fellow by the name of Zeno, Z-E-N-O. He was the founder of a school called Stoicism. And the word stoic is probably a familiar word to many of you. A stoic is one who suffers without complaint, being indifferent to pleasure or pain. And Stoicism is the endurance of pain and hardship without complaint. Now, I'm not bringing this up as something that we should be espousing, okay? But I wanted you to see that this idea has cropped up in more contemporary forms. For example, there's a plaque at Our Lady of Lourdes in France that reads as follows, and this is exactly what it says. Of course, it's in French, but this is in English. What I'll tell you, many of you will return home without a healing, just because it's God's will for you to be sick. This is your blessed privilege, for there is no better way to heaven except through suffering. This is the plaque that said Lady of Lourdes. Now, if this were true, then any remedial help or healing practice would be against God's will. And one would naturally draw the conclusion that the sicker you are, the better off you are. One would also have to take another look at Jesus in this light, who went around healing the sick, and so if this statement were true, then it would naturally follow that Jesus would be the Prince of Sinners. Now, this same idea cropped up in the Middle Ages. For the Pope at that time, he closed all of the medical schools, all of the medical colleges, all of the hospitals, because his idea was that if you were sick, it was God's will for you to be sick, and any attempt to heal would be considered a sin. And this lasted for about 100 years, you see, but still this idea was cropping up. Now, a great deal, however, in this teaching has contributed to the unfolding stream of truth. Zeno felt that man's problems were related to an over-involvement in external things, binding themselves to the externals of life. He felt that man is to learn to be self-controlled, get in tune with an inner rhythm. And one of the best things that he ever said, as far as I'm concerned, was this statement: the most important part of learning is to unlearn our errors. The most important part of learning is to unlearn our errors. There was an emphasis in Zeno's teaching of positive thinking even way back then. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic. Some of this thought even appears in a more contemporary poem of W.E. Henley's epic poem called Invictus. Anybody familiar with that? Okay, they put it in, they made a beautiful song out of it. But here's what it says, and see if you can pick up the Stoicism in this. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods there be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Now, Zeno had a strong influence on self-mastery and self-control, which, of course, is one of the pillar teachings in New Thought, and certainly one of the pillar teachings in unity. In about the 3rd century A.D., after Christ, we have a fellow by the name of Plotinus. He was a Greek mystic. Okay? Now, a mystic is one who has an intimate first-hand acquaintance with God. So that's, all of us are mystics in that sense. And you can look it up in the dictionary, and that's what it says. Mysticism is the belief that direct knowledge of God or spiritual truth is attainable through immediate intuition or insight. But anyway, Plotinus was this type of thinking individual. He dealt with a dynamic universe, a universe ever manifesting itself at particular points as particular things. We should get out of the thought that God created us and then left us apart from Him to struggle alone. But we should get still and realize and experience the whole universe. In other words, God, rushing, streaming, pouring into us while we stand quiet. Now, this was Plotinus. This was what he was saying. This was his way of expressing this stream of new thought. It's sort of a beautiful idea, isn't it, leading to meditation. And even the psalmist picks up this idea in Psalms 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Now, I'm not going to deal too much with the oriental fount of this stream of new thought, although it's rich with it. In India, we have multitudes of streams here. We have the ancient Vedas, which are the ancient writings, the ancient holy texts. They date back as far as recorded records go. In Hinduism, the idea is all is one and one is all. Beyond the one, there is nothing. There was the Vedanta school, which clearly gives much in the stream of new thought and dates back even beyond 700 B.C. Their teaching was all human misery and suffering is caused by a separation in consciousness. And this was the teaching of that particular school. And where have you heard that before? Therefore, a breach in the oneness takes place through a consciousness of separation, a belief that we're separated from God. However, in the Hindu thought, it says that the separation does not really exist. And where have you heard that before? See, it's not real. It's merely apparent. It's on the surface. You see, we can never be separated from God. We can feel like we're separated. We can build that separation in our minds and in our consciousness. But in reality, there isn't any separation. That comes right out of the Hindu stream of new thought. Jesus picked it up. Judge not according to appearances, but judge righteous judgment. In other words, right useness of your judgment faculty. The teaching then was God is real. Matter is the unreal. Still, it parallels unity very closely, as you will see. In the 6th century before Christ, we have the Lao Tzu. His teaching was the human spirit has its source in the divine fountain, which must be permitted to flow freely in man. This was kind of his teaching. Many of you are familiar with Eric Butterworth, who is a unity minister in New York City today. He wrote a book. Butterworth wrote a book called In the Flow of Life, and this is where he got his inspiration to write that book, was back from the writings and teachings of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu felt that anything is evil that blocks the flow of creative action, and everything is healthy that flows with the universe. It's a very interesting concept, thought about good and evil. In other words, what he was saying, if you block the flow of abundance, you experience lack. And if you block the flow of health, you experience disease. See? Then this is so closely to what unity is all about and what we're teaching. In 1375 BC, 1,375 years before Christ, over 3,300 years ago, a young king took the throne of Egypt, and he parted with his military. He overruled the entire thieving priesthood and discarded the whole religious establishment, which was the worship of a multitude of gods. This was very common back in those days. And we go back this far because that's as far back as we can go and find anything recorded. And so this king set up a whole new concept of one universal God, way back then. A God who is not the Lord of just one land, but of the whole earth. A supreme spiritual being, loving toward all his creatures, and he broke with his forebears and broke with the tradition of the king being God. And he told them all that he was just a man just like everybody else. Yeah.
In the paper that just came out this week, the king you're talking about looks just like Elvis Presley, and his life parallels just like, like,
is that right?
It's fantastic. It looks just like him, and he talked, you'd have to read the article, but it's just who you're talking about.
Okay. Well, this guy's name was Ignatin.
Yes.
Okay. This is the first expression we can find anywhere of what is called monotheism, the one God. And this influence, no doubt, found its way through Moses, who spent a great deal of his life in Egypt, and who was taught the concepts of one God. You see. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the biblical characters because we have a lot of classes here at Unity in which we do spend time with the characters in the Bible and in which this unfolding new thought was shown. But now, let's get back to Ignatin. Now, Ignatin called the one God, the one universal force, Aton, A-T-O-N. And Aton, to him, was the source of all energy, the primal source behind all things, a formless essence, an intelligence that permeated the universe. Sounds like modern metaphysics, doesn't it? Here was man's first attempt to define God in intangible terms, with idealistic qualities, away from anything that had a form. Now, Ignatin's government was a total failure. Total failure. Simply because he totally divested himself from any deity and simply became one of the boys and therefore destroyed any authority that he might have had. But he is important to us because the idea of the fatherhood of God, the inner experience of God's presence, and the love of natural beauty were thus deposited into the cultural soil of the world. Obviously, this had a great influence in the ensuing generations. It's my personal belief that some of these ideas were even before this, but they were never recorded. He was probably the first to teach a doctrine of peace and love and non-resistance. He shocked his contemporaries and his military by refusing to put to death the soldiers when they were captured. It was common practice at that time that all captured soldiers should be destroyed immediately. And this was just the way it was. This was common practice. There was never a thought in those days of taking prisoners, and of course he was told that you are supposed to destroy your enemies. And his reply was recorded as this: do I not destroy my enemies when I love them or when I forgive them? And I think that, wasn't it Lincoln that said something similar to that? And it pops up again. Chuck?
They tried to destroy up to two. They tried to stricken everything, that he said to him, and all his writings and all.
Yeah. Right. There was another one we'll talk about later that same thing happened to. This stream of thought can be traced right up through to Jesus, for we can see it in his teaching of the indwelling presence of God. And as we know, Jesus also had to break with the established religion of his day
in order to express this truth. Perhaps you don't realize it, but when Jesus came on the scene, he just tipped everything upside down in all of the religious beliefs and practices, because what his teaching was entirely opposite of what had been taught up to that point. And it not only shocked a lot of people, but it caused a lot of problems. And this is the reason why they hated Jesus so much, particularly the priesthood, because he was destroying all of their wealth and power if everybody would start to believe and live these concepts that he was teaching. The 13th century, we have an interesting fellow that pops up. His name is Meister Eckert. Anybody heard of him before? Okay. Yeah, in my class. Well, Meister Eckert was a priest of the Roman Catholic Church in Germany. He's considered the father of German philosophy. And how he ever remained a Roman Catholic priest, I'll never know. And how he ever kept from being burned at the stake, I'll never know. One writer of Eckert said that the only reason he was spared burning at the stake is he had the courtesy to die before they tried him. But it was probably because he was so popular and so loved by those around him and those in the philosophical field that admired him, quote, at a distance. He was simply a loving person. His insights, his concepts were as clear a metaphysical teaching as you will ever find from any metaphysical teacher of today. Unfortunately, most of the works of Meister Eckert were destroyed, okay, by papal order, as his works were considered heresy from a Catholic point of view. But we do have some left, and this is one of them. It says the celebrated 14th century mystic and scholastic. Now, Meister Eckert was a simple parish priest. He taught pure truth as we know it today. Obviously, the people didn't understand him, but he exuded love, and the people just loved him. And I think that's the reason that he was so popular with the people that the papal authority sort of left him alone. But they did bring him to trial, incidentally. And that he died before it was finished and they could burn him. So the starting point of his teaching was this, that God is being. If God is all existence, he said, it is impossible that anything can exist apart from God, for then it would be outside his being. Therefore, all things in their substance are themselves God. Can you imagine this coming out of this little parish priest back in the 1300s? Whatever else they possess in time or space is but an appearance. This is certainly modern metaphysics, and yet it was taught about 700 years ago in very difficult surroundings. He also played with this idea of the allness of God, and in rather shocking terms. He says, nothing is as close to me as God. He is nearer to me than I am to myself. His presence is my being. He would make such statements as this: I never thank God for loving me because God can't help himself. And this was to evidence the idea that God is a great universal force of love which is constantly supportive of that which it creates. So the idea of asking God for love or forgiveness to him is a total redundancy in the concept of allness. God is love, and God is a loving process. See, in unity we have learned that instead of asking, we should learn to claim that which we are. Because we are taught that we are perfect children of God. All that the Father has is ours, and it's the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. So it's already ours, and he felt it was redundant to ask or beg or supplicate for these things. We have perfect health, perfect peace, perfect love. That's all within us, you see. We're already created that. We may not express it in the outer, but we're already created, this beautiful spiritual being. And this was the ideas that Meister Eckert was giving out, and the people just loved it. Our need, he said, is not to get God to love us or ask God to forgive us, but to forgive ourselves. Stop frustrating the flow, he said, and let this energy of love flow forth through us. In other words, the idea that we are an open channel for the full and complete expression of God's good through us. And we are. We are. We may not choose to express any of it. That's up to us. We have freedom of choice. He said, God expects one thing of you, and that is that you should come out of yourself insofar as you are a creative being and let God be God in you. A little parish priest back in the 1300s. He said, some people want to see God with their eyes as they see a cow, and to love God as they love their cow. Now they love their cow for the milk, the cheese, and the profit it makes them. And this is how it is with people who love God for the sake of outward wealth and inward comfort. Indeed, I tell you the truth, he's saying, any object you have in your mind, however good, will be a barrier between you and the inmost truth. People should think less about what they ought to do and to have, and more about what they ought to be. In his teachings, there is always the influence that if one holds right attitudes, and he is one of the first I've run across who refers to right attitudes leading to the concept of positive thinking. But he always related this to the idea that the most important thing in your life is the realization that you are the activity of God, manifesting as you. He said, when you are thwarted, it is your own attitude that is out of order. This is teaching of modern metaphysics. Not very popular, is it? When you are thwarted, it is your own attitude that is out of order. And that certainly is modern metaphysics. It's not very popular to blame, to look at ourselves and realize that we have to make some changes. Out of the old fundamental type group that I came out of, we always were asking God to do something spectacular to make things right in our life. But we want to still go on doing the same things that we're doing, you see. And the thing that we learn is that God doesn't change, but we sure can. And we can begin, God doesn't change, but we can change by bringing our thoughts and actions up to the God level and begin to operate our lives from that beautiful, perfect consciousness. And this is the ideas and the concepts that are springing up from this well, if you will, and springs up at different times through different individuals. As you'll see in the third and last talk on this, that you'll find that there are many people contemporary in the last couple hundred years. There is also a stream of truth that has come through psychology. The word psychology really means the study of the soul, or psyche. The name psyche was used by the ancient Greeks to describe the human soul, and the soul to them was symbolized by the image of a butterfly. It's real interesting. Now, if you think of the metamorphosis of a worm changing into a butterfly, you have one of the most imponderable, mystical, baffling, magical, delightful processes that I suppose no one really understands. A complete disintegration of the worm into liquid or living water, reduced to elements from which a new substance comes forth, and in the worm or the caterpillar there is no foreshadowing of the beautiful butterfly at all. and in the butterfly there remains no remnants of the worm or caterpillar, and yet there it is. I think this gives some indication of what was implied by using the butterfly as the symbol of the psyche or the soul. The soul, therefore, is the key to the potential of man, species man. The miracle of growth and overcoming, the belief that man can transcend his limitations and unfold his perfect self, his God self, his Christ self, has prevailed through myth and teachings for ages on end. From the earliest times, there has been a belief that there is an urge in human nature which impels man to seek in many endless ways for something which he never fully comprehends, but believes to be a supreme reality, and somehow he has always known that he can never be happy until he attains the fulfillment of this intangible something, which is rather complicated, but then so has been our religions and philosophy. Now, in the earliest periods of history, there were actually wise men who made a serious study, of the nature of the human mind. We see records of this back as far as the 6th century before Christ. One such was a man by the name of Heraclitus, who was very deeply involved in the study of the human mind. You think that's something new? No, not a bit. He said that the human mind has no boundaries, no limitations. We find in Plato's Republic, the classic work of Plato, in 380 BC, that Plato recognized the influence of the mind and emotions upon physical health. Socrates related to Plato the story of a charm which Socrates had obtained from a physician who, in giving the charm to him, had advised him, and these are the words we get directly out of Plato's Republic, sound very much like something that would be expressed today in defense of psychosomatic medicine. But it says this: the cure of a part should not be attempted without the treatment of the whole. Now, this is 360 BC. And also that no attempt should be made to cure the body without the soul. And therefore, if the head and the body are to be well, you must begin by curing the mind. That is the first thing, to cure the mind. 380 BC, this was written in Plato's Republic. The great error of our day today in the treatment of the human body is that physicians separate the soul from the body. Now, we're coming around now with physicians. But all of this was recorded way back in 380 BC, and yet we seem to get the idea that we in New Thought have just started the idea of mental cure, you see. But it's been around for a long time. It disappears for a while and then springs up. We have some marvelous people today that are using these principles now. Bernie Siegel, Dr. Bernie Siegel will be here in June speaking to the Unity Convention here. And we have, trying to think of it, Dr. Symington, who used to be in Fort Worth, the cancer specialist, a cancer doctor, who begins working with the mind with his patients. Any of you familiar with fire walking? Okay. Anybody done it here? Okay. It's a technique that Dr. Symington uses with his cancer patients. And he said, now I know what you're thinking. What on earth does walking on the coals of fire have anything to do with healing people? And he said, just this. When I get the patients, when they come to me, he said their belief system is this. If I walk in water, I get wet. If I walk on hot coals barefoot, I get burned. If I have cancer, I'm going to die. And this is the belief system that they have. So what he does is he teaches these patients to walk on a bed of hot coals, 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, and they don't get burned. I've seen it. I've not done it myself. I'd love to do it, but I have not done it myself. But he teaches them how to fix their mind so that they won't get burned. And what he says this does is when they get through walking over the coals and they don't get burned, all of a sudden they get it. I've got cancer, but I don't have to die. Immediately it changes the whole mindset. So he begins working with the powerful mind that we have first. And then he continues the normal treatment that you would give for the disease. And he also teaches them to use imagery, to begin to see in their minds, for example, teaches some of them to see a great big fish swimming around in their bloodstream with tremendous jaws. And that fish goes around and it eats up all of the bad cells. And the patients that can do that don't think it's a bunch of hokey, they get well. They get remissions. Okay? Chuck.
You remember John Taylor?
Yes,
Okay.
sure do.
He took one of the courses that the man had, he charged $250.
Right.
And it worked. And that man said that he could teach you how to walk on water if you could just get someone to show him how to do it.
Right. Well, we can, I think, with our mind.
That's where it all is.
That's right. Okay, I want to finish up with this. In early times, there was an emphasis on a mind process that today we probably would call intuition. Education was not so much putting ideas in, but drawing forth what they called the wisdom of the gods. For instance, Aesculapius, a Greek physician, was probably the founder of the first hospital of all the ages, used to train his disciples, who were medical doctors, or at least would pass for medical doctors in that day, first of all by acquainting them with all the knowledge that was termed physique. That is the science of the physical part of life. And then he would train them in the art of meditation. Always taught that they should be still and let the wisdom of the gods reveal the mysteries that would be required. In other words, open ourselves up to that divine mind, infinite intelligence portion of our own minds. In other words, they would seek from intuitive guidance, or from God, if you will, in making what today we would call a diagnosis. And this goes way back before the time of Jesus. This is not new. It may have been lost for a while, but it is not new. Not much happened in the Middle Ages. It sort of went underground. And, however, I want to take a look at a Swiss savant. A savant is just a man of learning. He had a rather weird name, at least from a Western point of view, because his name was Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. Now, with a name like that, I think you would want to run for cover. And I guess he did, because he referred to himself by the name that we remember him by as Paracelsus. He lived 1493 to 1541. He was a pioneer experimenter in the powers of magnetic attraction. He believed that he had uncovered the hidden power of nature, and inadvertently he did open a new horizon of research. He used a magnet to heal disease. He touched off a wave that continued for actually several hundred years in Europe, which was referred to as the cult of the magnet. And they did some strange things with large magnets, both public and private, with all sorts of flourishes and so forth. He held that the impurities in the physical system were not physical, but more cyclical in nature, and that by this magnetic pull, which was applied in various ways, there was a method of drawing out the impurities in the system. Now, later, a Jesuit priest sort of carried this concept a little further, and almost to a more extreme and ridiculous point when he ground up magnetic lodestone and had the patient swallow the powdered stone, and then he applied a poultice of iron filings over the diseased portion of the body. And his assumption was that when he held a magnet to the poultice, that he attracted the iron filings in the lodestone and the fragments in the body, thus drawing out the affliction. And there were remarkable cures, which is kind of interesting, but probably tells more about the believability of human consciousness and the act of faith rather than the science involved. Now, I think, let me just finish it up here. Now, there was actually something involved in this research. It led to something interesting about the discoveries of the mind. See how this is unfolding. The cult of the magnet reached its height in the 18th century when a man by the name of Franz Mesmer. Ever heard of Mesmerism? Any of you who have had a background in Christian Science know that Mesmer was vilified by Mary Baker Eddy, directly at least, through the term MAM, which she called malicious animal magnetism. And I think I'll stop there, and I'll pick up our friend next week. We'll talk about Franz Mesmer, who was an extremely interesting sort of fellow, and what he did seems so ridiculous, and yet it was the basis for additional research and springing up of this new thought in the times that he was in, at least, back in the 18th century. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's just...
Well, it depends on how much you got.
You want a prayer for the offering?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know where the plate is at this moment.
Well, there's a basket in there, and we use that for prosperity consciousness. That's it. Haven't you heard of passing the hat?
Well,
That's it. Let's just take a moment. And Father, we are so grateful that we have this beautiful opportunity to share. And we take this symbol of God's lavish abundance. We bless it, release it, give thanks for it, and we just let it go out into the universal to do its work of healing, blessing, loving, and teaching. We are a part of this circulation of good. We give thanks as we pray in the name and through the power of Jesus Christ. Amen.
will you answer questions?
Yeah, sure will, if they buy.
One of the reasons John knows a little bit about mine is because he's just teaching the class now. He really has a background.
Okay, I'll be glad to answer any questions that I can if anybody wants to. Teaching what? Mind, the Master Power. It's at 9:15 right here in this room on Sundays. Yes.
You know, John, there's a lot of this magnetic stuff coming back up now. They're using the magnets in Europe quite a bit, and they're putting them, especially for muscles and things like this. You know, that's the work, doesn't matter.
Well, next week you'll learn about Franz Mesmer, and his thesis when he was in college was on the magnetic pull of the planets and sun and so forth. And it was, it really turned the whole deal on end, you know, because it was different. And he's a very interesting guy.
I just wanted to make a comment on, I just learned that, you know, like nutrition, I used to think that this was great, but the AMA, I think it is, I found out that most of the nutrition schools are kind of controlled by the AMA. You have to go to certain ones like in Huntington Beach, California, that has a super school that two people I know have degrees from, and things like that. But can I just give a little background on what you were talking about, reincarnation?
Oh, that.
No, not this.
Oh.
But, I was fortunate to see someone that worked with, let's say, regression. And like you talk about the soul, your whole ballgame is right there. But this one person, went all the way back when he came forward from God, and all that was said was, "Go unto my world and return it to me."
Okay. This is a fascinating subject. Sometime maybe if you invite me back, I'll give you a talk on parallel universes. And we go back and talk about reliving and that sort of thing. I'll tell you some experiences about that, which is...
They saw me in some other life.
Huh? Yeah. These are parallel universes. It's something that we've been working with for a long time, but now science is bringing parallel universes up. There's a book right now put out by Fred Wolf called Parallel Universes. He's a scientist. He's a physicist. And we have a number of other people that are think tank type people, okay, that are studying about parallel universes right now, about black holes. They feel that this is one of the corridors through which we live in parallel universes. And it's an extremely interesting, it's a type of talk that you want to go into with an open mind, because you're going to hear a lot of things that just don't make a lot of sense.
Your mind is like a parachute, you know.
You're right. You're right. That's true. Okay. If that's all you have,
Thank you very much.
we'll see you next week. Okay.